Construction Law. My name is Ngo Martin Zokoma. I'm a senior associate and in the law firm of Allocation in Lagos, Nigeria. I also coordinate the construction law practice of the firm. I'm also an executive director of the Africa Construction Law Initiative. As you may very well know, Africa Construction Law is a Pan-African initiative set up by construction law practitioners across Africa and in the diaspora to promote thought leadership in the field of construction law and practice in Africa. ACL, as it is popularly called, has an advisory board made up of experienced and distinguished professionals in the field of construction law. Indeed, we are very grateful to have Kwado Sakodi as one of our advisory board members. ACL is managed by a global steering committee made up of construction law practitioners and other professionals working in leading law firms, consultancies in Africa, London, and United Arab Emirates. As of today, ACL has country coordinators in 20+ African countries, including key African jurisdictions such as Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, and Angola, to mention but a few. Our country coordinators are supported by sub-regional coordinators and a board of directors. As ACL is set to launch today, people may be asking the question, why is it important to have a construction law focused initiative for Africa? The answer lies in the steady rise in infrastructure projects in Africa, which has been driven firstly by the increase in direct foreign investment in the continent. Secondly, African governments have prioritized the development of infrastructure projects in a bid to achieve regional integration triggered by the commencement of the African Continental Free Trade Agreements. Consequently, and going forward, the demand for construction law expertise is likely only to increase. Unfortunately, with the number of infrastructure projects rising within the continent, so too will the frequency of construction and engineering disputes. Regrettably, and up until now, African arbitration practitioners have been sidelined in international arbitration, including construction disputes. For instance, the recent ICC statistics show that despite African countries representing 7.5% of the total parties involved in ICC arbitration cases filed in 2019, only 3.6% of the arbitrators appointed originated from Africa. This is a stark contrast to North and Western Europe, with 56.4% of arbitration appointments, and South and East Asia, with 9% of arbitration appointments. This trend is equally true for participation as arbitration counsel in international construction disputes. One of ACL's aim is to provide support to African practitioners so that more effective participation in international arbitration, and more particularly, arbitrations involving African parties is achieved. To achieve this objective, ACL would encourage construction law expertise through capacity building and training. In the coming years ahead, we hope to embark on the following. Number one, we would engage and share ACL platform with young professionals seeking areas of law to specialize in. Secondly, to promote all forms of ADR and to encourage and support the development of litigation and ADR support services, such as claims, delay, quantum, architectural, and engineering expert witness work in Africa. Thirdly, to contribute to the development of practitioners in Africa with construction law experience by providing a devoted forum for specific construction law training, engagement, and networking. Finally, we'll seek to showcase the construction law practitioners within the continent that hold a wealth of construction law experience and share such experience through the ACL platform. In doing so, it is hoped that the pool from which African arbitrators can be shortlisted for arbitration appointments will be expanded and diversified. At the core of each of these objectives is ACL's aim to provide thought leadership in the field of construction law by contributing to the development of the law, policy, and practices including the use of dispute avoidance and resolution within the construction industry in Africa. ACL has achieved Pan-African coordination and cooperation among construction law practitioners across the continent, and is currently working collaboratively with law firms, chambers, consultancies, employers, contractors, government authorities. ACL seeks to engage in research at regional level and collate data relevant to the construction law and practice in Africa, including assisting African governments, entities, corporations in the area of capacity building and training in matters connected to construction law. In doing so, it is hoped that it will be understood that construction law and practice across the African continent is not and ought not to be broad brush in its application. Rather, there is much to be gained from the insights shared by experienced practitioners from different African regions and indeed African countries. If you would like to be part of ACL's initiative, we encourage you to reach out and join ACL through its membership portal on ACL's website. You are eligible if you are interested or professionally involved in construction law. Our members come from across all sectors of the construction industry. For example, lawyers, architects, engineer, surveyor, contractors, developers, arbitrators, and experts. Therefore, on behalf of the advisory board and board of directors of ACL, I would like to thank all our collaborating and supporting institutions whose support, without which we would not have had this launch today. I would also like to thank and extend my personal gratitude to all our advisory board members and our incredible board of directors who have worked tirelessly in the past few months in ensuring that this event is a success. I'm also grateful to all our sub-regional coordinators and country coordinators who supported ACL initiative from day one and have worked tirelessly in ensuring the success of this event at the sub-regional level. I'm looking forward to a great event today. And so please enjoy the conference and thank you very much. I will now hand over to Kwado Sakodi, who will give the opening remark, the keynote address.
Thank you so much, Ngo Martins, for that excellent and inspiring opening address for today's sessions. You've certainly made me, my fellow members of the ACL and all the attendees feel particularly welcome, excited and inspired by this latest phase in this unique event as we now turn our focus to Lusophone Africa. And of course, Ngo Martins, while you've been too modest to say it, I do think that your vital work in and supporting the ACL has been superb, it's been invaluable, and it should not go unmentioned. You've been a driving force behind this entire program of events and more broadly, but still more importantly, the vital and unique role that ACL stands to play in Africa's onward march. This event, this valuable initiative, owes a huge amount to your inspiration, determination, and drive. Credit too is due to the range of panelists, to the committee members, to the advisory panel members, to all of those who work together to drive forward the initiative that is the ACL and to make events such as today's possible. Now, Ngo Martins, as you've illustrated with your introduction, construction is incredibly important to Africa's future, and the law is incredibly important to construction. Major construction projects are a challenge, that's a fact of life. And all the more so when we consider the many mega projects, many thousands of smaller projects, which must be completed in order to bridge Africa's infrastructure gap. Nobody who's worked at the heart of a construction project, in whatever role, would say that the experience is stress-free, without trouble, or without. Projects are constantly at risk of being upset by unforeseen events or circumstances. That is never clearer than now, as we find ourselves still a year on into COVID-19 related restrictions, lockdowns, and the like. Further risks are posed by differences of views or objectives among the wide range of disparate parties, players and interests, that includes funders, governments, contractors, consultants and so on, who must work together towards a common goal if a construction project is to be successfully delivered. Now, this is where the law and those who practice, advise on and utilise it plays such a crucial role. The law sets and applies the necessary framework, allowing for risks to be anticipated and responsibility for them to be allocated in advance. It provides clarity and a way forward where things go wrong or when interests conflict. And it is about so much more than simply disputes. Indeed, it is a sound understanding and application of the law that is the most crucial tool in which disputes can be avoided, minimised, and/or properly managed. The Lusophone African region, which we'll be exploring today, comprises countries of great interest and promise. Angola and Mozambique, which our panelists will be looking at today in detail, hold vast reserves of mineral and energy wealth, which are to meeting the world's needs. At the same time, they have growing and ever more economically active populations, which will require substantial expansion in amenities, infrastructure, energy, and utilities if they are to achieve their true potential. And against the background of global enterprises such as China's Belt and Road Initiative and America's efforts to counter China's growing global influence, Lusophone Africa is an attractive focal point for substantial foreign direct investment as well as capital exporting countries. Let us not forget, and as you, Ngo Martins, usefully reminded us, this is the year that sees the coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is a product of the largest free trade agreement since the creation of the WTO. It serves to enhance economic integration and cooperation, worth some at $3.5 trillion, with a population of 1.2 billion people. It offers a vast further potential force for Africa's further development. Now, despite the immense challenges that the world is facing at the moment against the background of the global pandemic, these trends offer the prospect of enhanced prosperity and development in Africa and in the Lusophone African region in particular, and playing a central role will be infrastructure development. This is therefore an exciting time to be talking about the law and to be talking about Lusophone Africa. An exciting time to hear about the opportunities, to hear about how to avoid the risks and how to learn to navigate the legal landscape. And that is exactly what we'll be hearing about today. Now, having spent time with panelists who we'll be hearing from today, I have repeatedly been deeply impressed by their knowledge and experience of the countries concerned and by their passion for the subject. Our panelists come from a wide range and a varied selection of fields. There are legal practitioners from both contentious and non-contentious law. We have consultants, we have government represented. We also have a fantastic geographic spread. There is vast amounts of real in-country know-how. One of the benefits of this remote working environment that we share at the moment, we can have in the same room, as it were, practitioners from Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, London, all providing their unique insights and know-how. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing them share all of this in the upcoming sessions. So thank you, Ngo Martins. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, ACL. And thank you to all the attendees. Thank you all for joining us. Mayor Brown is absolutely delighted to be joining with you and to help host this event, to share your knowledge, to share experience, and to enjoy the insights of these expert panelists. Everybody watching, listening, playing a part in this event, I ask that you please get involved, please ask questions, network, and please engage and support with the ACL. Most of all, please enjoy today's panels. Thank you very much indeed. I will now hand over to Gonzalo Falcao, who will say a few words additional words in introduction, Portuguese.
Bom, bom dia a todos. Eu vou fazer uma pequena introdução em português, apenas para fazer eco daquilo que o Coado já referiu. Portanto, hoje vamos aqui discutir o presente e o futuro do setor da construção civil em Angola e Moçambique. Temos, como o Coado referiu, um âmbito muito amplo de painelistas. Temos pessoas, temos engenheiros, temos advogados, temos consultores financeiros, pessoas com visões bastante heterogéneas daquilo que é o setor da construção, com experiências também muito diversas. Temos também membros representantes de agências e instituições oficiais dos dois países que vamos abordar, Angola e Moçambique, aos quais desde já agradeço a presença e ensejo a votos de uma boa apresentação. E portanto, enfim, em suma, não me vou alargar muito. Espero que desfrutem da informação que vai ser partilhada. Tenho a certeza que vão gostar, sobretudo porque, como eu disse e repito, a experiência diversa das pessoas que estão aqui hoje vão com certeza agregar muito à discussão. Portanto, sem mais delongas, e agora vou passar para inglês. I will now ask for the next speaker to jump in. I believe it's Dr. Chimbamba from Apex Angola, which will be our keynote speaker for Angola. So please, Dr. Chimbamba, go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon for everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation that you received to take part in this meeting. According to the time, I will briefly give some information about Angola. That's why I want to say that 2018 was approved the investment private law to establish all the conditions how the foreign investor can apply investment. Angola has a lot of opportunities, especially in the construction sector. That's why the sector is considered as a special sector for attracting investment. This law also establishes all conditions how the investor can apply the investment, how can repatriate the dividends. Everything is established in this law. Also, it was create some condition to simplify the investment procedures. That's why it was approved with one-stop shop. His main role is to support the investor to make the investment in Angola. It's in terms of contact with the public institutions, example for visa. As you know, some countries have problems with visa. But the of IPEX, we have this one-stop shop to support all investors who want to invest in Angola. Also, this one-stop shop gives the support for all investors in terms of contacts for all public institutions. In terms of project in Angola, the last 4 years, the number is very few. Don't have many investors. First, it's resulting from the international financial crisis. Also, the COVID all contribute to the reduction of investment. That's why in construction sector, number of projects we are receiving outside is very few. Notwithstanding that, Angola has a lot of opportunity. This area have many in terms of management infrastructure, but in this aspect, the government also has making many efforts to create some infrastructure in terms of communications, railway lines to support the investment project. That's why all investors who want to invest in Angola sector, in construction sector, they are welcome. the government grants some incentives, tax incentives and the customer incentives, facilitate the investor to make the business in Angola. In terms of conflict, maybe the eventual conflict that conflict must arise in the investment implementation. So it's possible to move through arbitration, have some arbitration center, some private and public center. As you know that when we're talking state system, political system, we have some time delay. That's why that in terms of conflict, we can move, investor can choose the arbitration to solve their conflict. What was signed the New York Convention. That's why that we are a member of this convention. To simplify all procedures relating to solve the conflict arising investment process. All this project move through IPEX, meaning that the IPEX is public institution has the responsibility to move, to promote, and give all support that the investor needs in all sectors, including the construction. So we have staff that support the investors. We are working with the immigration services, the Ministry of Construction, to give all necessary support to investors to implement their project in Angola. That's why all is open. Opportunities is very big. We have a lot of opportunities, construction activities. That's why we invited investors who want to make a business, want to use this platform as a channel to promote the whole economy, to attract investors to come to. That's what I want to say in this notes. Thank you. Any question? I think really open. Thank you.
Dr. José Chinjamba, muito obrigado pela sua intervenção. Eu vou só fazer aqui um breve resumo daquilo que acabou de referir em português, umas notas muito breves sobre o facto de Angola, desde 2018, ter uma lei de investimento que é seguramente a mais pró-investidor sempre no contexto recente, uma lei que de facto propicia ao investidor privado um regime flexível, um regime seguro. Hoje em dia não há em Angola montantes mínimos para investimento. O processo de investimento privado também foi amplamente simplificado. Como disse o Dr. Chimbamba, é um processo que deve ser processado junto da IPEX e que hoje, enfim, tem prazos de resposta e de aprovação bastante curtos, incomparavelmente curtos comparado com o que existia no passado. O setor da construção é, para o governo de Angola, hoje em dia, um setor prioritário e, portanto, a lei reflete isso mesmo e, portanto, quem pretenda investir no setor da construção civil tem a possibilidade de acesso a incentivos de ordem tributária e, portanto, neste contexto também Angola oferece instrumentos legais de proteção ao investimento privado, seja pela garantia de repatriação dos dividendos, seja pelo acesso, por exemplo, a plataformas de arbitragem para a resolução de conflitos, assim como Angola tem hoje em dia um amplo espectro de acordos bilaterais de proteção ao investimento que permitem precisamente aos investidores privados estrangeiros uma maior segurança quando investem em Angola. Dito isto, eu passaria agora a palavra ao nosso keynote speaker para Moçambique, que fará uma intervenção de âmbito semelhante àquilo que o Dr. Xinjamba acabou de fazer. So in English, do we have our keynote speaker for Mozambique? Well, I'm afraid he's not at the panel yet. So perhaps we can move forward towards the Angola panel. Bruno Miguel Vedor is the panelist is the keynote speaker for Mozambique. He's probably having some sort of internet connections issues. So perhaps we can move forward towards the Angola panel, and then right before the Mozambique panel. And in case Bruno is able to reconnect, we will ask Bruno to make his presentation right before Mozambique panel. So starting with the Angola panel, I believe all the panelists are here. So we will start. I'm the moderator. I will just quickly introduce myself. My name is Gonçalo Falcão. I'm a Mayer Brown partner based in Brazil and half-time Angola. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, I've not been able to travel to Angola quite often as before, but in normal circumstances, I spend most of my time in Angola as well. I'm a co-head within the firm for our Lusophone practice group, which includes Angola and Mozambique, notably. And today, in our panel, we will, of course, discuss the construction sector in Angola and in the region in general. And we will focus on the challenges that Angola faces. And in that regard, we invited a broad group of experts with different experiences. We will have Gideon Kemialukoda, is a Ugandese chartered engineer that works intensively on the implementation of health and safety procedures in engineer companies throughout Africa. Usually is called to provide his input on distressed projects. He has a wide breadth of expertise in that regard. We also have Miguel Alves. Miguel Alves is the managing director of Remark Capital Partners, which is a financial advisory firm that works with Angola. Miguel is as economist, is a project finance expert. He has tons of expertise dealing with project finance and other construction-related projects in Angola and elsewhere in the region. Then we have Tiago Almeida, which is a senior investment officer for International Finance Corporation, which IFC, which is a World Bank Group entity. IFC is heavily involved in providing finance, trade finance, equity investment, and other kind of investment transactions throughout Africa and Angola in particular. And finally, we have Etueva Nogueira. She's a partner from the Angola independent law firm Leeds, which is part of the Denton's group. So with no further delay, I will start the panel, just providing a quick introduction. So just to say that the Angola construction sector grew more or less at 9% a year between 2006 and 2014, a period where the government benefit from high oil prices and therefore significant revenues, which allowed the government to focus on repairing and modernizing the country's infrastructure, which was pretty much damaged from the decades of civil war. But unfortunately, all these projects dried up following the fall in the oil prices that we experienced in 2014. So from 2014 up until today, we can say that the government or public investment in the construction sector almost freeze, not completely, but mostly. But still, the construction sector in Angola accounts for over roughly 15% of the GDP. So it's fair to say that since independence, and mostly since the end of the Civil War, the construction activity in Angola relied mostly on state investment. Of course, the exception is the oil and gas industry and some civil construction in Luanda. But of course, the state has been, for most part, responsible for developing infrastructure in Angola. We understand, and we'll discuss that, that the state realized that it cannot be the main player in order to develop infrastructure in Angola, and therefore private investment, whether being local or international, is definitely the key to develop the infrastructure that Angola needs in order to boost its process of economic diversification. Taking this in mind, taking this context in mind, we will start our debates. I have my first question to Gideon. Gideon, you are not Angolan, and therefore you are not so deeply involved in the Angolan market. However, you have a wide experience in the region, a diversified experience among different countries in the region. So I think you can provide us a general overview on what has been or what should be the approach of African countries as Angola. Many of them quite rich in natural resources. What should be their approach in order to shift the responsibility of infrastructure development from the state to the private partners, whether they are international or locals? Please give us a little bit of your experience in that, and your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonçalo. I will approach that question, I think, in 4 parts. One, setting out what probably I would expect the role of the nation to be, and then moving to what private investment is likely to be, looking at that, and then what countries can do probably to attract in the investment, and from my experience, what I think is likely to be the bits that needs to address the African needs, in a sense, that go with that. In my perspective, the role of the state is mainly to act as a trustee or a guardian for its citizens for the future generations. And in doing so, it largely manages 2 key resources, that is land and the people. So those are the 2 primary capital investments that the state has at its disposal. Now, Africa as a whole has been caught in a situation where its capital has been disrupted over centuries. First, it was disrupted through the slave trade era, where the human capital was actually taken away from the continent and taken to develop other nations. And then the second wave came post-independence. During that period, in between there, most of the African continent was occupied by the colonialists, in which case they used the human capital to develop the capital at home for the benefit of others. And actually in that period there, we saw a lot of development across many African nations. And then post-independence, that's when we went into a period of where the African capital, I would say the human capital, started losing value. And why did it start losing value? A number of conflicts did emerge post-independence, actually, for a number of nations in that period. What conflicts do is that they displace people from the land. And in doing so, coupled with the loss of human life, you lose capital. You lose the knowledge that people have acquired, in a sense. So people are not able to actually transfer knowledge to another person to learn how to do a skill that is required. So a lot of skilled people are lost in those conflicts. The secondary aspect is, which is a barrier to knowledge transfer, is a language that is adopted. Most of our ancestors, for instance, used to speak in the local languages. being able to teach your child how to do a skill, which then you pass on. When we got occupied, I had to learn Portuguese or English or French, or German in some instances to be considered land and be able to teach someone else that bit. So that meant that all the knowledge that the people had in medicine, in infrastructure, all of it disappeared in a nutshell. And actually that issue still exists today, that a lot of human capital, particularly that is tied up in the youth, is still locked away, because we still require these people that may not prefer to sit in a formal education to be able to learn a language before they can contribute positively to what? Positively to society, as they say. So that is the challenge that mainly the African countries do face. And any nation that needs to develop its people has to be able to ask itself, how do I unlock this human capital? How do I get both the land and the people to be able to deliver in a way that I have peaceful coexistence amongst the citizens, and that people are living sustainably with nature? Now, in the past, since independence, we have had development finance partners, mainly the World Bank, the likes of Danida, or that have provided funding for infrastructure development. And in doing so, they tend to have capacity building clauses in their contracts. Those capacity building clauses are intended to transfer knowledge from the companies, organizations that are based in the development partner nations to the local people. But unfortunately, that has not often transpired to be the case. So consequently, you find that 20 years from, say, independence in the 60s to now, most of the construction work is undertaken largely by foreign companies, in a sense. So that remains a shortfall. So in a nutshell, I would say that the current approach to investment from outside Africa is mainly that of capital displacement rather than capital augmentation. So the citizens are still locked away. They're not able to contribute to what? To their economies as they should be able to do that. Now, construction does provide a key enabler for that, as we've seen in the past, for instance, when there are a lot of jobless people in the US or the United Kingdom, where a lot of investment was made by just encouraging road building or housing construction, and people being taught to learn on the job, even without going through formal education. That allowed industry to develop and to flourish and for everybody to come through. Then that expertise being exported outside to enable the country to also now earn from its investment in its people. So this has to be practical, I think, the way to go about it. And when we try to now say, for instance, when we try to ask ourselves, now we know what the problems are, and we appreciate that. I'll take a quote from one Mr. Smith, that it is not for the kindness of the brewer or baker that we expect our dinner, but rather their regard for what? To feed their family, in a sense. So we do not expect free cash to come in from outside Europe into the continent without them getting something. But what we do hope to have is a way in which our mutual interests can be met. All right. Now, for the mutual interests to be met, the principal question has to be right money from the right source and for the right reasons. I recall that mantra being put around the papers at the time of the recession, where people were asking if the right money is not aligned to the right source or right reasons, then you're not going to have a good partnership between private and public sector as a result of that. Now, do many of the African governments have the skill set to analyze that lineage, to be able to understand, am I getting the money from the right source? Am I getting it for the right reasons? And am I, that element there may not be really clear. As a consequence, the same mistakes keep on being repeated and repeated and repeated. And consequently, up to now, we still attract a lot of money. You still speak of a large volume of construction work going on in the continent, but ultimately Africans are still largely very poor, living on $1 or so a day, and unable to break that poverty chain that they find themselves caught in. So on the part of the private investors, yes, many have come in and put in money into the system, but you will find that because of the low incomes from the population that is supposed to fund that infrastructure, the revenues that come from the projects you invest in are quite low. So that is a risk. So for instance, you go and uniquely do a district power project when a person earns $1 a day. That means that at least to avoid being, say, fuel poor, they will pay a third of your income. If a third of your income goes into a particular aspect, then you are living on the verge of poverty. But if we use European standards, that means that if I invest in a generation project and I expect to get 30 cents off the $1 that the person does, and then that person is living on the margin of poverty. And yet, most of the time, when you look at these infrastructure deals that are done, most of the people are looking at returns that are greater than that. So there are those challenges that people are faced with. And we have seen instances in the papers of recent where some certain governments are being accused of basically taking security of ports and airports because African governments have failed to what? Are failed to pay back. And that is some of the issues that people are really faced with. So how can we then move away from that discrete approach to try and ensure that the capital that is we're attracting into the continent actually helps unlock to increase the incomes of the citizens of the African continent, so that then they can be able to afford to pay the fees that come from this project, so that then the private investor can get his return on the money. That is the thing that we need to look at. And to be able to do that, you need to first invest in how the budgeting process is done, because as nations do the budgets, they're in a sense strategically prioritizing the resources of that nation. So if you look at how the budgeting is done and check if the objectives are clear in how they are prioritized them, are they driven by ensuring people have jobs or improving productivity? If it's not for jobs or productivity, then probably that's likely to be redundant investment. Then how is the governance going to be over that for people to ensure that the benefits that you've been told as a private investor are going to still be accrued? You provide that oversight to ensure that there is no misalignment later on. Secondary aspects about how are you going to support the capacity and capability? Because ultimately, if the cost of living in the continent is low, that means that the cost of infrastructure provision should also be low. And if it is low, it means that as a private investor, you're going to put in little money and get something good, something good that is out, as compared to putting in a lot of money and then you lose your investment and end up with securitization. Things that can easily trigger conflicts later on when people don't feel that they're getting value for money from their taxations. So ultimately, if people have jobs and are productive, then incomes are likely to increase, which then increases the tax base for government as well as disposable income to pay for the user fees and avoid any rising, any issues that come with food costs and all that. What have governments now? What we see is that because of that, there is a drive to make everything local, and governments have done some policy interventions in that regard. They have passed PFI, Private Finance Initiative or PPP laws to enable long-term infrastructure investment into the country. Some have formed specific PFI units within them to enable them learn how better to deal with private investors. A number of nations now have passed local content laws. Now, the purpose of these local content laws is meant to encourage local capacity development and knowledge transfer from it, but ultimately there are still some bottlenecks in there, because in most instances, for instance, you want local content to be there, but at the same time procurement rules are basically biased towards the foreign companies. So there's still challenges in that space. We've also seen the governments breaking down some of the large state monopolies. Like for instance, in Uganda, the Uganda Electricity Board that existed was broken down into 3 distinct chunks of generation, transmission, and distribution. So then that allows private investment to be put in the right places and the areas that possibly have political risk being retained by government. There are some entities where there are some instances there where you have on top of that, you've got some tax breaks that have been given to companies. For instance, we have in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the Chinese government had a Sicko Mines deal, where in exchange for copper and cobalt, they promised to build a lot of infrastructure, but alongside that, they had a big had a big tax break, such that they were freed from taxation until the loans, the money that had been put into infrastructure is recovered from that. We also have initiatives that are around land use, land development, where investors can be given a piece of land to procreate these eco cities or urban cities that sometimes we hear about. From the capital perspective as well, we've seen a change in most of the traditional funders of government, as a private, if I call it private, have been doing. We have the World Bank IFC branch now offers local currency loans, something that never used to exist. They used to give it in dollars or euros. Now they provide local currency. We have GPIC, Facility for Africa Investment, which also lends in local currency. But ultimately as well, we have an entity called Garanco, which provides guarantees for local currency bonds and local currency loans for infrastructure. You know, it operates only in local currency. Those things have helped at least make sure that in such an extent, the investments have less risk or can be affordable. The other thing that is also happening at present is that the more local players in a number of African countries, for instance, Kenya, are trying now to pull resources together, the capital that is within the population. They're trying to pull resources together to create things like municipal bonds or pension funds that they can directly then put in infrastructure. So with most of these across bit, guarantees are still needed from official agencies, which still exist. Now, out of this, some of the initiatives I could mention that are happening. In Uganda, we have the Global Energy Transfer Feed-in Tariff project that is aimed at providing capacity of about 160 megawatts of power. This one, basically, the government, they call it the Get Fit program, where you get a number of projects, 17 small-scale renewable energy generation projects, getting them together, making them bankable, and then put them to bid for private investors to put money in. It is somehow similar to the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program, procurement program in South Africa, just that one has a more larger scale power plants. The same is done by AfCFTA. Now, AfCFTA was mainly established by African governments and the Africa Development Bank. Still, its main key bit is to try and bridge between government and private sector by trying to bring projects together to make them bankable for private finance, to come into them. Those three programs are about the entities putting projects together and then saying they're attracted to a private investor come and put in money. There is in Kenya in particular, you have it's similar to a road fund where the funds are collected through, say, an increase in fuel levy. It's indirect, an increase in fuel levy and other charges like vehicle inspection fees, but are earmarked for specific projects. Now that makes them attractive for private players to come in via the contracting aspect, knowing that they are going to be paid back indirectly. So you're not worried about investing in rural roads because you won't have the volume of traffic there. But you know that because collectively the government has put money through fuel levy there, you're going to get some portion of payment through that. We also have the Kenya Pension Funds Investment Consortium that is trying to work at collecting a lot of money together so that they can then direct it into infrastructure. And where it is short of cash, it links in with other foreign pension funds to augment its capital to be able to invest. Could any of those be considered good success factors? In my opinion, I wouldn't think so. Why do I say that? HKA, my company, has what we call a cracked database. Within it, we capture why projects do fail. Now, when you look at that information from the African continent, you find that most of the reasons identified for project failure on the continent are around capability and capacity building instances. They somehow stem from that. That means that most of the investment that is needed to manage most of the risks should be really going into augmenting capability within their projects for that bit before you become more complex later on, like the reasons we see later on, in projects why they're failing in Europe or in Asia. In Africa, the low-hanging fruit is investment in capability and capacity, and which somehow marries back to unlocking the human capital. Now, to be able to do that, you have to move away from to do that well and effectively. You have to move away from the discrete nature of projects that the way people are done. Like I have an example somewhere, I think on one of the roads that was done. The moment the road was laid, tarmacked, the locals put maize to dry maize on the road, you know. So when you want to avoid such instances, you need to try and look at the system as a whole as compared to discrete. It's not an isolated road or an isolated power plant there that may be needed, because as you know, if infrastructure is an enabler of capital, then you have to be thinking, how does it unlock capital from land and from people? So there has to be a clear mapping on how a particular investment is going to contribute to a net cash inflow via exports into the economy, and possibly a single point of repayment mechanism from the export income. You know, if you can't map it well, then chances are you are not likely to get your money back. You see that? And then how do we, when we are moving forward from there, you have to say, have we got a situation that can do that before? Yes, there is. Most people think PFIs, private finance investment, started recently in the 90s, but that's not the case. Private finance investment started way back in the 18th century from the French Wales, but on the continent, it started mainly in the colonial era. Typical examples are the companies, the British East Africa Company or the East India Company, or the companies that are used in Latin America through the sugarcane foundations. How did those companies do what they did? I'll use the example of the British East Africa Company, which basically required the British government to guarantee investment into the East African Railway. So that means that at bottom line is someone has to guarantee the job, and probably government has to guarantee it, which is somewhat similar to today, that the guarantee someone always has to guarantee it. But after that guarantee was done, a campaign went out asking for men of enterprise to come and put in cash into the job. Now, what these people did behind the scene, the administrators, was to say, okay, there is not going to be direct payment from the railway itself because it is an enabler. What we are going to do is to make sure that there is a supply chain behind whose income then will pay back. So the land was divided into areas, those for copper mining, those for cotton growing, those for coffee growing, and food crops, cash crops, and minerals. So then that money was, and the system was set up such that then from getting the produce from the farm, say for instance, there was a cooperative union in place to help get the so many small outgrowers to bunch their pods together. Then you have the marketing boards in the middle to make sure they can market their produce outside. And then that then gets transported to the railway and then exported outside. So the entire value chain was streamlined. Everything was interconnected as a full system. The railway took about 50 years to pay back. But what we saw in that period is that there was free, good quality education. Infrastructure was well developed. There was no one city taking the full, taking the dominance as we see today, in a sense. But we, once that, due to wars and conflict, most African countries receded from that development and hence went backwards. So what we may need now is that type of systemic approach where you have to ask yourself as a private investor, I'm putting in my money, but how is this going to contribute to a net import of what? To a net income via export? If you cannot get it directly, but it's essential, if you see that it's essential, then how well can you manage? And this is why you may need separate program project advisors that can help you in planning that initial work. How do you initiate a project or a program or a portfolio at this, at that beginning? Because if you don't get your initiation right, then chances are your money is not likely to flow in the what? It's not likely to flow to the benefits you want.
Yes.
Thanks. Hello.
Gideon, thank you very much for your broad explanation. I think you gave us, as an African, you have the legitimacy to give us this, broad outlook, historical inclusive, that is very, very helpful for everybody to understand where we are coming from and why we are where we are, basically. Now, shifting more closely, zooming into Angola, Miguel, I have a question for you. Gideon just gave us a list of challenges that African countries have to dealt with in order to deploy local capital, private capital, whether it's local or foreign. Now, looking more closely into Angola, you have significant experience with projects in Angola that are financed from abroad. We don't have that many, but Angola is in the process of opening up its economy, and as I mentioned in the beginning, shifting shifting the initiative of developing local infrastructure from the state into private investors, even if in a PPP arrangement with the state. In your view, what do you think are still the main constraints that Angola has to attract more investors and to attract more attention into infrastructure and construction projects? Thank you.
Hi, Gonçalo. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone listening today. Well, I think that when we speak about infrastructure and infrastructure investment, there are, we have to consider that these are long-term. It's a sector where you have long-term assumption of risk by all those committing capital. So it's a long-term business. These are industries that are typically regulated directly or indirectly by the public sector. So even if it's a way to shift the responsibility of investment and developing projects to the private sector, the public sector always has a very strong role as a regulator, as the entity that is awarding the concession, has a very important role in the way the deals are structured. And obviously this is a sector where we have considerable financing needs with long-term maturities to match the capacity of the assets to generate cash flow and pay for the debt service. So there's always a huge requirement of capital, long-term assumptions of risks, and regulated industries. So in general, I mean, there are, I think, three conditions that make that really are important for infrastructure projects to be feasible. One is the general investment conditions of the country, where you have aspects as convertibility mechanism from local to foreign currency, legal framework for foreign investment, specific regulation on PPs and PFIs, red tape, bureaucracy, transparency, anti-corruption measures. So a lot of factors that affect the general investment conditions. Then secondly, the quality of the projects, how well they are structured, and in the end, if they are bankable. So, and for that, you have things like, what is the underlying business case? Does it make sense? Do we have a rational, an economic and financial rationale for that underlying business case? Because, sometimes there are, PPPs and PFIs and concessions, sometimes they are not very popular. And they are subject to public debate, but in many cases the problem is not the model, the problem is the underlying business case. If you have a good model applied to a bad project, it's not going to change the fact that we are dealing with a bad project. Then we have the risk matrix. So identifications of risks and the assignment of those risks between public and private sector. That's one of the key aspects for a project to be well structured. The required maturity, all of that. So all items that really contribute for a project to be feasible or not. And then in the end, I think also very important to attract foreign investors and to create in kind of a good mood for the country to attract international investors and lenders for infrastructure investment is the consistency of the pipeline and the deal flow. So, if you have only one project once in a year or once every 2 years, the country is not going to generate enough awareness to the international infrastructure community. And, it's going to be really difficult to attract foreign investors, for deals to be more a kind of, for the government to have the kind of a competitive landscape in terms of tender, and a positive tension in terms of how well they negotiate the interests of the public sector and of the project itself. So these three aspects are really key for to set the right mood for investment and to attract international investors. And as a new market, as we said, this is a sector that is really dependent on the way the government and the public sector in general approaches the issue. As we are dealing with assets that are regulated in many cases, and the fact is that apart from commodity-driven projects, like mining, oil, and gas, many of the other sectors of infrastructure the public sector always has a role. Obviously, the private sector always has to do their part, and contribute, including with the initiative to submit non-solicited bids, to discuss ideas with the public sector. But I would say that many of the responsibilities, especially for a new market like Angola is on infrastructure investment, is still a lot with the public sector. So if we see these kind of three areas that are really key, so the general investment conditions of the country, quality of the projects, and then the quality of the pipeline. In terms of the general conditions of the country, I think that the Angolan government has been doing a good job in the last years in terms of the public policies, the way they are addressing, specific laws and general laws like procurement to be done by the public sector. Also, in terms of macroeconomic and monetary stability, and the policy behind that, I think, which is a key aspect to mitigate many of the investment risks. I think that the Angolan government has really been, generating the right framework and the right kind of environment to attract international investors. It's a very long-term effort, but I think we're going in the right direction. Then, secondly, in terms of quality of the projects and how well they are structured, we also know that parts of the public sector are doing a lot of investment on this. We see the Ministry of Transport, for example, working very well in the way they are structuring the projects. We also know that it's kind of public information that the Ministry of Economy also has a task force that is kind of developing pilot projects in order to establish best practice on structuring PPPs and PFIs and concessions. But obviously, this requires a lot of knowledge, and which is knowledge that typically comes also from advisors, legal and financial advisors. Also, the multilaterals that are very, very important in the way that they bring their expertise to the public sector of each country, and help those public bodies to understand what are the key aspects for the projects to become bankable and to attract interest from the private sector. So, and work, a lot of work has to be done around the risk matrix. So, which are the specific risks of each project? Which are the specific risks of a particular country? And where is the stage in which the country is at that moment in time? So, for example, in Brazil, when PPP started back in the 90s, there was still the need for, when you had projects where the public sector was, the payment entity and not the users, you had situations where it was required for a kind of a PPP guarantee fund to act as a collateral for the commitments that the state was assuming towards the private investors that were the equity providers for and operators of the projects. And you really need to understand what are the specific gaps in terms of risks, and which are the risks that the private sector really has the conditions to accept and to manage. And when that is not the case, other measures have to be suggested and used by the private sector. The last aspect that I think is really important, which is the consistency of pipeline and deal flow. It's really important for countries to have programs based on sectorial asset classes. So to have a program on transports, to have a program on energy and renewables, a lot of the examples that Gideon gave us on what happened in many countries, a program on water and sewerage, for example. So if you have programs and you have consistency of pipeline for each of these subsectors, because infrastructure as an whole also has subsectors, and you have equity investors that are really focused in water and sewerage. Others are really focused in energy and renewables, and each subsector is kind of has its own specific rules and stakeholders. So it's really important for governments to understand this, to commit to a program, to organize that program, to have long-term planning of that program, and to bring in a kind of a very consistent way deals to the market, and that will attract foreign investors. So I think in general, my final thoughts is that Angola is really in the first stage of what can be the development of an infrastructure market for the private sector. I think that, you know, some of the key things are already being prepared, but I would say that a lot is still to be done. Also a lot of, I think, challenge in terms of, you know, local banking capacity to provide long-term funding for these huge capex requirement that we have in the country. So a lot is there to be done, but I think, you know, as long as we move forward and as long as we have projects and we learn, we will also be able to improve and to move things in the right direction.
Thank you, Miguel. Just a final thought from you. I can get from your words that from a, I would say, legal standpoint, Angola has already or is paving the way to develop infrastructure. So the government, the president, since he was elected, has been working hard to improve the general business environment in order to prepare Angola to be more receptive of investments. And Miguel, do you think, from your experience, do you think that the political thinking is already accepting the idea of you know, shifting away responsibilities from the state into the private players in order to develop infrastructure in Angola? You just respond in 10 to 20 seconds. What's your experience, your views about that?
I think it's work in progress, Gonçalo. I think there are some sectors of the government that are very pro kind of projects driven by the private initiative. Other sectors are more conservative and are still trying to understand how you can open the door to private investors, but still, you know, keep the on the side of the public sector, you know, the right mechanisms and the governance models that will protect the interest of the country as a whole. So it's I think some of the sectors of the government are still trying to understand how that works and how effective it can be. So I think it's work in progress. We have, for example, Ministry of Transport. I think they are being very, very proactive and very, very, you know, going in the right direction totally. Other sectors are, I think, a little bit more behind on that, but generally, I think we will get there.
Thank you, Miguel, for your answer. Now I would ask Tiago. Tiago, the IFC has a pivotal role over the last few years on deploying the infrastructure sector in Africa. I would say it's fair to say that IFC, by sending you to Angola, never paid so much attention to Angola as now. So I would like for you to explain what are the main goals of IFC in Angola, what you guys are looking at with more attention, what sectors within the major infrastructure sector, what are you looking at more carefully, and what are the main challenges for IFC in Angola? Thank you.
Thanks, Gonçalo, and thanks to the organizers for the invite. So as you mentioned, IFC is part of the World Bank Group. We only deal with the private sector. So whilst the World Bank itself engaged with governments and provides support, grants, facilities, etc., the IFC is basically just the private sector side of the group. So historically, Angola has been, particularly in infrastructure, been a government-led economy. So all the major infrastructure projects were being developed by the government as public investment, where the government, based on its surplus budget, etc., could borrow large amounts of capital and then essentially use that to pay for construction works. As we all know, the Angola economy is going through a very drastic change since 2014, and of course that ability to continue to fund infrastructure is obviously diminished. So That obviously to respond to all the needs, there's a need for diversifying sources of capital, and of course the private sector has an important role to play. So with that context, I mean, the AfCFTA has opened an office in Angola a year and a half ago. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it's been mostly closed, although we have now on the ground a team of around 20 professionals working on the 3 different pillars or industries, as we said, at AfCFTA, of which infrastructure is one of them. So, I mean, in terms of our goals, I mean, it's, our mission is to create development, to help countries to, provide better living conditions for its citizens and promote development. Doing that, of course, in a commercial manner where we seek an appropriate return for our investment. But obviously, being part of the World Bank Group, we can always do or take more political risk and, take, significantly longer tenors for certain debt instruments. So our mission in Angola is really to help to create markets, as our sort of slogan say these days. We do that by, in 3 different ways. One is advising government in terms of how to go about, preparing, let's say, PPP programs, certain reforms, or we can actually then, in a more sort of intermediate stage, we can also work directly with the government or with the private sector to co-develop projects where we provide early risk capital, early development capital, take that risk as a developer, and then hopefully, work on the deal to make it a bankable transaction. And then lastly, which is really the bread and butter for IFC, is to, once we have bankable deals, IFC is obviously very interested in coming up with the financing. So those are the 3 sort of ways in which we can help. In terms of specifically for Angola,
I think Tiago is experiencing some connection problems.
I do and private sector involvement. Hey, can you hear me now? I was getting a call. Sorry.
Tiago, no, sorry. You were saying that specifically for Angola. Please pick up from that point. Thank you.
Yeah. So for Angola, because it's a market that is only now really seeing opportunity for the private sector to come in sectors historically led by the government, including infrastructure and civil construction. Our intention is really to, firstly to support government in promoting these projects on an advisor basis or co-development basis, but it's also to find reputable sponsors locally and international that want to to invest and see IFC as a good partner for that. I mean, ultimately, what we want is obviously to help to diversify the Angolan economy. To build infrastructure to enable agriculture, to enable industrial output, and obviously, promote more regional integration with its neighbors, in the SADC region.
So it's fair to say, Tiago, that if I'm an investor, if I have a greenfield project in Angola, whether it's power, agriculture, whatever, one of the first doors that I should knock is definitely IFC, right?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, we are on the ground. We have, through our World Bank colleagues, direct access to, to government institutions, to the different ministries. The World Bank is supporting some of those ministries in, again, implementing reforms, all of that in coordination with IMF as well. So from our side, as I said, we are able to deploy capital and expertise very early on in projects. Be it, we have 3 basic teams. So the first one is infrastructure, which includes anything from roads, transportation, telecoms, logistics, and so on. The other one is a financial institutions group, which, you know, it's banking institutions, insurance, etc. And the third one, which I think is really important for Angola, and where some of my colleagues are working quite hard already these days, it's what we call MAS, Manufacturing, Agriculture and Services. So we have all sorts of different experts, from investment professionals to advisors and to project developers. Yes.
Thank you, Tiago. Now, because you know, from my experience, one of the main difficulties when dealing with Angola and other countries in the region is basically to, okay, I have a project, I have, you know, this vision, but you cannot do anything in Angola without, you know, I would say having some sort of government blessing or approval or knowledge, and establishing that dialogue with the government, unless you are very well connected, is not often simple. So from your words, I extract that, you know, IFC can help to establish that bridge, that gap between investor and the state to make sure that expectations of everybody are aligned, correct?
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think Miguel, you know, made a point before, which I think is I fully share that view, which is, I think some sectors in Angola understand and are sort of more at the forefront of developing opportunities for the private sector, namely the transport ministry or the transport sector. Others, I guess, it's you know, for other reasons, not just because of, you know, lack of experience. I mean, if you look, for example, at the, you know, power sector, which basically relies on government offtake to buy the power to then, you know, sell back to the grid. You're relying on one single client, which is state-owned entities most times. And, you know, those historically, those sectors have been, you know, have been put in the difficult situation because, you know, we have, you know, a sector that as a whole is not sustainable from a cash flow perspective, still relies a lot on subsidies, and of course those situations are not really, you know, appropriate for a private investor to come and take that sort of risk. So, you know, in those cases, of course, there are reforms that need to happen in the power sector. That doesn't mean that, you know, IFC or good sponsors cannot come in and invest in power generation, for example. We just need to make sure that the government understands that, you know, to make a project bankable, there are a few important commitments by the government that need to happen. And once those are in place, then, you know, it's a matter of optimizing the deal for all the parties, but at least you don't have any sort of bankability fatal flaw. So my experience has been so far that the government is really interested. Some sectors are really more active, I guess, because it's easier. I mean, if you look at the transport sector, you know, if you're investing in a port, you're not taking, I mean, your cash flow is not coming from the government or any state-owned entity. You know, you're basically getting your cash from the market. So it's structurally easier for some sectors than others, but I think, at least in our engagements with the different authorities and sectors, there's a genuine interest to do that. But how we get there is obviously there's still a road ahead. And I guess we're here to help. That's our mission as well.
Thank you very much, Tiago. I will now shift to Itueva. As I mentioned in the beginning, one of the first steps for a country that really wants to develop its infrastructure, not depending 100% on the state, it's to you know, have proper regulations, proper legislation that contemplates investment stability, investment security. You are a lawyer, as I am, and you have been involved in of course, in Angola, we don't have that many projects, you know, boosted by the private sector, but we have a few, and you are involved in some of them, and you have experience. So, give us your views on whether or not Angola has today the proper legal instruments, the proper legal framework to support private investments in infrastructure. In other words, making it more simple, do you think that regulations or applicable law is one of the challenges towards private investment, or investors may, you know, should mostly concern about the commercial terms because the law, covers what needs to be covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonçalo. Well, what I can say is that as we listened in the beginning by Mr. José Chinjamba, our investment law has changed, has been through several changes in the last years. And the last one was to remove all the limits for private investment. So we went from a private investment law that demanded 100K in minimum capital for the investment. Then we went to another one that demanded $1 million. And now we are at a point where our investment law requires nothing. So it doesn't have a limit, a minimum amount established in the law. So it is the first step that we can see that our state is has more understanding of what is necessary to attract investments. But of course, we come from that. There is this difficulty. We come from a situation where we have the law, and then we sometimes we have to wait 1 or 2 years for the decree. For instance, since the approval of the investment law until the one-stop shop of IPEX, it took a little while. So as soon as we receive a law, the first thing that we as lawyers are looking forward, because when the clients or the investors receive a legal alert saying, well, our law has changed, they will not make questions regarding the main law. They will do questions regarding how this is applicable to their investments. And that's when we see ourselves in a hole or in the middle of nothing, because at some point we have nothing to say. We still have to wait, and we keep saying to the clients, wait a little bit more. We are still waiting for the approval of the regulations. But still there is an effort, of course. We can't deny that there is an effort and things are happening, but a more active and more accurate legislative action would be essential, to attract investment and to give confidence to our foreign investors. Definitely. So, for instance, I told you about our investment law. Now we changed our PPP law. The later was from 2011, so a new one was approved only in 2019. So after so many years of blocking projects, of blocking investments, investors coming to Angola, unfortunately we see very successful projects, but we see others that the investor comes, they complete all the process for registration of their investment, but then when they need to execute or to implement their project, they cannot do, especially because of this type of problems between the law and the regulations. And definitely we need to do, we as lawyers need to put a little bit more, not pressure, but to walk side by side with our state, if we can be listened sometimes, just to make them see the difference, because it's not just the number of laws that the National Assembly approves. It is more important that to have a certain number of new laws is how they are implemented and how they make the life of the investors, not just foreign investors, but even national investors and national companies easier, because at the end of the day, if in terms of regulations, we can have as many regulations as we need, as long as they are doable, as long as the companies can comply with them, and as long as the public sectors are prepared, to reply to the private sector queries, so it's not a big advantage to have many regulations if they are not doable, and if it doesn't facilitate the implementation of the projects and at the end of the day the success of the projects, because this is what it is about. If we have lot of laws and a lot of regulations, but they are so complicated, and one law and one decree does not look at another one that connects to each other. It is strange. For instance, we have just seen, I know that we are talking about construction law, but we are now in the Africa Continental Trade Agreement. So we need to see how our laws will connect with that, because in one hand we are saying that, okay, we are part of a free market, of a free trade market. We can connect with each other. We can sell to other countries, to our neighbors, without taxes and without difficult charges. But then we still see some kind of regulation saying that, okay, if you import more final products than raw products, you will be taxed. You will suffer heavy taxes. Even if it's inside Africa, it needs to be aligned. There is a lot of work still to be done to align everything. That's what I feel.
Yeah, complementing your words, I would say that part of the job has been done. I remember the time when you took more than 6 months to set up a company and have a private investment approved. Now I think we have overcome that part. You can set up a company. You can set up a company a number of days, and IPEX has been working wonderfully and can approve a project investment in a matter of weeks, even less than that. I take from your words that that part of the bureaucracy is now well taken care of. The thing is that there is still a learning curve from both sides, but from the government side, to actually negotiate major projects by reference to the laws that we have in Angola. Because you can have, as you say, you can have good laws, but the government needs to have the proper experience to negotiate favorable terms. Because when we talk about private investment, you have to have a balance. You have to have good terms for the private investment, but the government take also needs to be fair. And the government needs to have that dialogue capability of being able to negotiate terms under the law. And I think from your words that there is still a learning curve to be done. And I take the example of the oil and gas industry, where Angola has decades of experience. Angola knows how to negotiate, and it doesn't need to take lessons from anyone how to negotiate a proper fiduciary agreement or a concession agreement or wherever, because again, it has decades of experience. But if you want to set up a power plant or a toll road or wherever, then the dialogue will probably be more difficult, because we don't have that many experience, and each case is a case, right? If you go to finance a toll road or a power plant or whatever, the specificities of the deal are different from deal to deal, so it becomes more difficult. So it's fair to say that there is still a learning curve to be crossed.
And not just that, for instance, we are talking about projects in the oil and gas industry. We need to be careful, and we need to be aware that it is a specific industry, and the regulations and rules around the oil and gas industry are not just made for one country. It is what is the practice in Brazil, in Nigeria, in US, in the oil and gas industry. It's uniform. So we need to be, as you said, it is a curve of learning, because at some point we are approving some laws here that are not aligned with the industry, and it is an industry of multinationals, which means that when a company prepares a budget, it takes into consideration several countries, not just this country. And definitely it is a curve of learning, but still we have a lot of good professionals already in our public sectors that can help with that. So unfortunately, this is what we hear everywhere, and it's true. Pandemic didn't help. The drop off of the oil prices didn't help at all. Let's see what happens next, because good opportunities are there. We now have IFC in Angola. We have a lot of investment available. We had very difficult times where we needed new tax measures, you know, and new economic and you know, rules to get us to a new point where we could, you know, rebirth. That's definitely it. So conditions were created. We still have a lot to do. We are going to have elections next year. So 1 year is not enough, you know, to showcase anything. But if we are, if people are now prepared to think in the long run, you know, in long term, things will be better, and we will develop definitely.
Thank you, Itueva. I think I don't see any questions and answers to be answered by the panel.
The first one was already replied, which was someone claiming that this is Lusophone and why are you not talking in Portuguese? We were supposed to talk a little bit more in Portuguese, but of course you know, the organization it's Anglophone, and you know, the majority of our guest speakers are English speakers. So yeah. Yeah,
it's an international event. I explained that this is an international event. And of course, we are showcasing Angola and Mozambique to the rest of Africa and the world.
Definitely.
And therefore, we need to provide our content in English. Of course, if you were doing something only inside Angola or only inside Mozambique, we would definitely speak in Portuguese. We have done that in the past, but this is an international event, so we need to have all attendees, you know, able to understand what we are saying. And therefore, English was a law. Well, thank you very much, Itueva, for your intervention, and thank you, Miguel, thank you, Tiago, and thank you, Giron. As a takeout of this conversation, I would say that it's fair to say that Angola has been doing the right work. The government has been doing the right work in order to create a more favorable environment to deploy the construction sector, to have the private investors more active in that sector. The laws have the necessary quality or content. The investment environment is nowadays much more flexible, much more investment friendly. There are still some challenges, but we can say that the first right steps have been taken. But of course, as Itueva mentioned, things need to be looked at in the long run. We should not expect that from one day to the other, the Angolan infrastructure, sector will be you know, booming. But definitely, Angola has the right mechanisms, has the right regulations, and the right players to actually start to see a high development in its construction sector, boosted by private initiative. This said, I would now, as I mentioned before, Bruno Miguel Weber was our keynote speaker for Mozambique. He had some problems connecting before our panel. I believe he's now online, and therefore I will ask Bruno Miguel to give us his keynote speech for Mozambique, and we'll go from there, unless there is any other instruction. Bruno, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Gonçalo. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm a Portuguese speaker, but I can speak in English. It's fine, no problem. I just want to say that as any other country, we have a lot of interventions on this process of construction. Of course, the biggest client is the government, the state, that is ruled by the government, and he has laws to submit and to bid all these projects and tenders. And there's a private sector that is, in the private sector we have the construction companies, the builders, we have the consultancy companies that they are the ones that do, we call it fiscalization of the construction, and at the same time they are the ones that do the project. So on all this process, of course, we have a lot of problems and struggles. Just to give you numbers, 3 years ago, the Ministry of Housing They just say that they had like 500 construction or contracts that have not been finished by the contractors. That's a big issue. And overall, this discussion is just a point fingers, because the constructors say that it's a problem of the consultants because the drawings are not well done, and the consultants that do the projects and the drawings, they say that's not their problem, is the companies that do the fiscalization. So, of course, to manage all this process, we have IMC, that is the Association for Consultancy Companies. We have already a confederation for contractors, empreiteiros in Portuguese, and engineers. They have a ordem, né, dos engenheiros. They already well organized, and now 3 years ago we have the ordem of architects. So just to say that there's big entities from private sector, from government and social, from the social classes that are on all this process. And just to say, of course, we have laws, and I know my colleague is going to talk more about that, but those laws needed to be adapted according with time and the period that we're working on. We have been engaged in most of this legislation. Just for you to give an idea, today we had a meeting with the Inspection Geral of Obras Públicas, public housing construction, because they need to organize themselves to make sure that they are controlling the way people are building. Just to give an idea, Mozambique, we are 30 million of inhabitants now. We have 53 municipalities, and to compare to Brazil, I think they have 500 or something municipalities. So you can imagine that we are on a very slow way of urbanization and consolidation of our democracy. But all this process has a lot of challenges. Besides all this part that we are talking about in terms of laws, there's the informal sector. This plays a very big role because most of the part of the economy is being ruled by the informal sector. So the government has been working a lot on this private sector, informal sector. For example, we have a law from 2008 that if your income is not more than 2.5 million mets in dollars, I would say it's around 50, almost $50,000. If your income is not more than that, you can your taxes can be reduced at around 3%. So that is to encourage the informal sector to be involved. I would say we also have been involved on a network between Portugal and all Portuguese speakers, and Angola has been involved on that because the same as IMC, the Association for Consultancy Companies, didn't exist in Angola. We have been involved on that and helping to organize. So in terms of legislation, we have been working and giving some expertise of how we have the dialogue between the private sector and the government. So I think this gives a scheme on what position we are, and I'm open to any questions. And thank you, Gonçalo.
Thank you, Bruno, for your wonderful introduction. We will shift to the Mozambique panel now, but just before that, Gustavo Scheffer was supposed to make some considerations about dispute resolution in Angola and Mozambique. So before going to the panel, I will ask Gustavo to jump in and say a few words. As I mentioned before, we just changed a little bit our schedule, but we are on time. And Gustavo, please go ahead and provide us some comments on the litigation side, please.
Thank you, Gonçalo. I also invite Sakai to join the dispute resolution panel. Sakai,
I'm sorry, Sakai.
Hi, that's quite all right. Sorry, Gustavo, before you start, I just wanted to say thank you, Gonçalo, for your explanation regarding the whole Portuguese and English speaking aspect of it. I just wanted to clarify that the ACL is not an Anglo-Saxon organization, but in fact is a Pan-African organization with people from both Lusophone, Francophone and Anglophone, so all are welcome. So it represents the whole of Africa, not just the English speaking part. So I just wanted to clarify that. And thank you very much for your explanation, Gonçalo. Gustavo, over to you.
Thank you. Well, before I start, I would like just to thank the organizers of the Africa Construction Law Week. It's really a pleasure to be here and to speak this 20 minutes with you about a very important subject, which is dispute resolution in construction projects. So perhaps one of the most important things when we talk about construction projects, and this goes along the lines with what Gideon's presentation, what was said in his presentation, is that the parties to the construction project, for them, perhaps what's the most important thing is to get the project done on time and on the budget. The issue is that this is in practice difficult because the project on itself is very complex. And so this will very frequently, if not necessarily, give rise to many problems and disputes. Then the question that arises is how to ensure that the parties are dealing with these problems and disputes in an efficient manner, manner to get to the goals that they have, which is to deliver the project on time and within the budget. And this leads me to my first question to Sakai, which is, Sakai, what do you think are the drivers of problems and disputes in construction projects?
Okay, thank you for that question. Well, at HK, we have an integrated research program called CRUX, and I think Gideon mentioned it earlier on, in which we have collated and analyzed data on major capital projects in Africa and globally. And our research shows us that the top main causes of claims and disputes are change in scope, contract interpretation issues, incomplete design, late approvals is a critical one. And sitting behind these causes of claims and disputes, I would say there are two key basic factors that drive the development of conflict. The first one being uncertainty. As we know, most construction projects are one-of-a-kind creations to serve an owner's individual goals and objectives. They are constructed in unique locations and site conditions, and typically represent unique combination of design features and systems. So ultimately, uncertainty is one of those things that needs to be considered. And the second thing really is behavior. Behavioral problems need human interaction, personalities, cultures, and varying professional backgrounds among project teams. Let's not forget, for many of the construction projects, usually it is, individuals who've never really worked together. So they're being pushed to work together for the first time on most of these projects. And we can't ignore the reality, which is simply that, whilst the success of a project is largely based on how it's been set up, the reality is that construction is really about people. And to a large extent, the way that people interact with each other will impact on the success of the project. So conflict can lead to deterioration of relationships, breakdown of trust, all these issues. And so these are the two key drivers that I would say are behind even the conflicts that we see and the disputes that we see. And today, our discussion really is highlighting the measures we need to adopt to avoid some of these. So that being said, Gustavo, when would you say that parties should start thinking about dispute avoidance and resolution? in construction projects?
Well, that is actually a very important question, and the answer is very clear from the outset of the project, but from the very outset, from the conception of the project. And when I mean from the outset, it means we need to look at it from two perspectives, from the contractor's perspective and from the owner's perspective. From the contractor's perspective, Angola and Mozambique have been developing their legal framework, and the contractor should be aware of this legal framework to take advantage of it. And for instance, contractors, when they consider investing in those countries, may take advantage of investment treaties that these countries have signed. For instance, Brazil has signed investment facilitation agreements with both Angola and Mozambique. These facilitation agreements do not provide for arbitration between investor and the state, but they do provide some type of protections and some mediation mechanisms. So it is something that they should be aware. If they consider that's not sufficient, they should then eventually structure their investments in a different way through other countries that may have investment treaties with investor-state arbitration. From the owner's perspective, we know that the general rule is that the owners, they do control the drafting of the contract. So they do control what's, to a very large extent, what goes in there. So the owners, they need to make sure that when they are drafting the contract, that they include the necessary tools for the parties to avoid and resolve their disputes efficiently. These mechanisms may be, for instance, engineer, expertise procedure, mediation procedure, dispute boards in its different forms, and of course, arbitration. These different tools in some way need to be in the contract before the contract is signed. If the parties wait for a dispute or a problem to arise, and then later will go look for which would be the mechanism appropriate for this situation, that's too late. They will probably not agree. They will be in a difficult situation. So from the outset, both parties need to be mindful of that disputes and problems will necessarily arise, and they need to take a step towards fixing this before actually the problems arise. So proactiveness is the key word. And I think that makes me think is that this proactiveness may come even when the owner is choosing the way of contracting the project. So this is a question to you. What do you think are measures that can be taken during the procurement process to reduce the risk of problems and disputes?
Interesting question, and I would say there's a lot that parties can actually do, and we can't cover them all, but I think the first one being choosing the correct procurement route. It has often been said that the project disputes are to some extent the consequence of how projects are procured. Procurement methods and procedures that emphasize on collaboration, not just within the project team, but also between the client and the project team. Such methods are in themselves a good way to foster conflict avoidance in the delivery of a project. Something else that parties might wish to consider is partnering, which is basically a broad term that describes collaborative management approach and encourages openness and trust between parties to a contract. And this can be done at a project level or even a program level. And granted, there's much learning and attitudes that might need to change and cultures that might need to change to adopt this way of working. Using the correct pricing structure, it's important that the owner chooses the appropriate pricing structure. So for example, if the employer is looking for cost certainty, then a lump sum contract will be better than maybe a reimbursable type contract. And if a lump sum contract is used, avoid including too many provisional sum items, which then undermine the cost certainty that they're trying to achieve. Being aware of underbidding, because when this happens, it's more likely to lead to disputes. Employers should be wary of contractors who submit low bids just to win a contract, because then you know, they will seek to try and recover this through the shortfall of inflated claims and additional costs for variations. So it's always good practice for employers and owners to challenge the assumptions that are made behind the prices that are being submitted. Another thing that they could do is just making sure that they are certain about what is included in the price, because uncertainty over what is included in the contract price, from our experience, is likely to lead to claims and variations on the part of the contractor. So that needs to be clear. Again, and I think you sort of highlighted it, the clarity in contract drafting, especially, you know, to include, it needs to include, should I say, it needs to include all forms of contract documents, not just the legal framework itself. And one critical thing as well is just early risk allocation. So a comprehensive risk analysis should be completed at procurement stage to just clearly define the risk allocation strategy. So if the contractor assumes a risk that is incorrectly judged or underestimated, they will try and recover the cost for this from the other party. So parties really need to ensure that the allocation of risk accords with the parties' commercial understanding. So, I mean, those are just a few. I could say a whole lot more, but I think in the interest of time, I will leave it there on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, you said something very interesting about challenging the assumptions of the price offers. And we have examples in practice of where the winning offer is $1 billion cheaper than the second offer. and that raises the question where when something looks too good to be true, probably it is too good to be true. And I understand that some companies are more efficient than others, but $1 billion more efficient is almost, it's too hard to believe, too good to be true. So owners there, and when they receive such discrepancies, of course, they're not going to ignore the offer that's $1 billion cheaper, but they should take very serious process to see what's happening and if that's realistic or if that's just an offer to win, to be awarded the project, and 3 months later start issuing a change orders and requests for additional payments.
And you'll be surprised in some instances as well, you will have a contractor with entire teams that are dedicated to generate claims. So that,
and then that's in the business of building something. You're in the business of creating claims, and then that has derailed the project from the outset. But but now, Sakai, going down to the construction site and getting our boots dirty. So in a very pragmatical way, what do you think are the best ways to avoid disputes in a project?
You can't beat good management. Proactive planning and management of any future works, as well as raising early issues of concern, allows the parties to analyze and manage problems. So I look at good management as the preventative medicine of disputes effectively. So in our experience of disputes in construction, the seeds of conflict are usually seen in the documents that form the technical basis of the construction and the contract. And there's usually gaps and conflicts between drawings and specifications and schedules. And, you know, usually these occur because there's inadequate understanding or coordination or even checking of these documents between the various disciplines that are involved in the design process. So I would say good design team management is essential. Again, good client management is essential in the sense that, you know, just taking it at its most basic, understanding the client's objectives and communicating issues and problems early, that is critical. Two other things I would actually say: contractor management. This requires a regular objective assessment of progress and the costs related to a project. And it also involves communicating well with the contractor and looking at ways of dealing positively and objectively with issues that may arise. And the last thing that I would say, last but definitely not least, because there's, again, a whole ton load of other things I could say, but record keeping, you know, something as simple as that. It goes without saying that poor quality record keeping undermines good project management, and it exacerbates the extent and the impact of disagreement, and will most likely make it difficult to resolve any issues. So I would say good record keeping leads to better project management, greater understanding of progress against program, improved communication, more informed decision-making and interventions. So I would say good intentional record keeping contributes to enhanced project outcomes, better performance against program, closer alignment of the final account to the client's budget, and reduced disagreement about quality and scope. So getting this right in conjunction with all the other principles that we've already discussed, I believe will sort of help to ensure the successful delivery of these projects. So I would say, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot that can be done, and clients and parties need to consider that. So having addressed this in very, very high level manner on how we avoid disputes in the first place, what are some of the ways from your experience, Gustavo? What are some of the best ways to resolve a dispute on a complex project? The actual resolution of it.
Yeah, just a point on the record keeping. It's a great way to avoid disputes, but in case you have a dispute, it's essential to win your claim, because without the records, you may be right. There may be a delay if you don't have the records to back it up, then you lose your claim and then you lose your money. On the more specific questions of how to, in fact, resolve the disputes that arise, one first point is that parties should consider legal counsel as part of their best for project strategy. Lawyers are not all bad, and sometimes we actually can be very helpful to the good outcome of the construction project. So the parties should actually, very early case in contract management, already have counsel with them and assist them throughout the process, and definitely if a dispute arises. But once a dispute arises, what mechanism to use? One thing that I always say that parties should be very aware that there's not one single mechanism that will be adapted for all types of disputes. In a construction project, there are simply too many variables. For instance, the dispute may arise right at the beginning of the project, where in that point, the parties may need a mechanism that resolves the dispute very quickly because they need to move forward with the project, but also a mechanism that maintains the good relationship between the parties, because they will have to work together for another 2 or 3 years in the project. So they need to fight just a little bit, but not too much. In that case, for instance, arbitration may not be the most, will definitely resolve the dispute, but it may not be the most appropriate because it takes some time and it's very conflictual. So in that case, something like the engineer or a dispute board or mediation may be preferable. And the other hand, if it's already the end of the project, the parties will never speak again. And what they want is a final decision. They may prefer arbitration over all the others, or they may have a need for a precedent. So the arbitration then has another positive side. So you see, there are just too many variables, the timing, the parties' interests. So what they need to do, and this comes back to my first answer, is that from the outset, they need to put in their contract not a dispute resolution mechanism, but a dispute resolution system. One example of dispute resolution system is the model used by FIDIC. FIDIC has a very complex system, but very complete system, which provides for very thorough contract management. The parties have obligations to notify each other. If they think they may have a problem, they already have to notify the other side within a short time of period. If they do have a claim, they do need to notify the other party within 28 days. That creates a dynamic relationship between the parties. The contractor will not sit on its claims until 3 years later, and then all of a sudden drop $1 billion arbitration on the head of the owner. So the parties will have to communicate and start resolving their disputes with the engineer at the first stage. the dispute avoidance and adjudication board as second stage, and arbitration only as a last resort for the disputes and problems that have not been filtered in the previous processes. So early preparation, early consideration of the disputes, and the inclusion of this dispute system is absolutely essential to get the project at the end within the budget and time. So that's kind of what I could add in this time. And as we are running out of time, Sekai, if you just would like to say a few words to conclude.
Right. Okay. Well, it is very clear from our discussions that what is critical for clients is, you know, time and cost, and the way to best ensure that that is achieved to their satisfaction is to ensure that they have mechanisms, not just in the contract, but also in their project execution plans, to ensure that conflicts are avoided as often as possible. And also in the event that, you know, disputes should arise, having something in place makes it easier to resolve that dispute. And not only that, enable them to work together in the future should they decide to do it, if the relationship is not so broken down at that point in time. But that's what we want to leave the attendees with, that it is possible to put mechanisms in place to enable you to achieve success on your projects. So with that, I think we have finished our little discussion. I'd like to, I don't know, should I be putting it back to you, Gonzalo? Are you going to?
You may. I'm the MC. I'm the MC now.
Right.
Well, thank you again, guys. Thank you, Sekai. Thank you, Gustavo, for the intervention. I would say that the takeaway word from your intervention is one, it's proactiveness, basically. Make sure that, you know, drop that old idea that let's close the deal and deal with the problems afterwards. That doesn't work. No. You just need to anticipate.
That doesn't work.
Hire the proper consultants, hire the proper lawyers to help you to identify, you know, points of concern and risks. And if you do that in advance, you will mitigate and highly reduce any risks of conflict. Very well. With that in mind, thank you again for your wonderful intervention. And I will now shift to my co-fellow mediator, Paulo Raj, that will handle the Mozambique panel. Paulo, are you there?
Hi, hello, Gonzalo. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Take away from here now. Thank you.
Thank you. So good afternoon for everyone who follows us from Africa and Europe, and also good morning for those who follow us from the Americas. Initially, I would like to thank Africa Construction Law for the event and for the invitation. And also I extend my thanks to the supporting firms and organizations of the event. Briefly introducing myself, my name is Paulo Raj, partner at Mayer Brown. As many others here, colleagues, I'm also a lawyer with a greater focus in infrastructure and energy. I'm also an academic with master's and PhD touching comparative law of the Lusophone countries. As a very short introduction to our Mozambique panel, we will basically demystify the construction law in Mozambique. So Mozambique has a great potential in the infrastructure sector, especially moved by several transportation projects for the country itself and as a logistic hub for neighboring countries, besides the energy and mining so-called mega projects, which have a global magnitude and provide several infrastructure opportunities within. And to help us to discuss such Mozambican potential, we have as panelists here. First, we'll have Michael Halliday, Director of AfCFTA. He's based in Worcester in the UK. We also have George Solomo, Associate Lawyer of FLA, based in Maputo, Mozambique. And lastly, we have Hugo Gaspar, his Projects Controls Coordinator of Zagopi from Andrade Gutierrez Construction Group, is based in Maputo, Mozambique as well. Before starting, and I will right away shift first question to Michael Holliday, I would like just to remind the audience, everyone who is following us, to feel free to send any questions for the panelists via the Q&A tool that you're going to find here below your screen in Zoom, okay? So as a brief introduction to Michael will discuss Mozambique infrastructure sector economics and also some aspects of dispute avoidance. Michael, as a short bio here introduction, he's a fellow of the Chartered Institution of Civil Engineers Surveyors. He has over 25 years of construction engineering industry experience. He has been the commercial manager and director through the last years, managing teams of quantity surveyors and contract administrators, delivering a broad range of contracts for UK and international clients. He has worked in several continents, especially in Africa, in a range of projects, focused on infrastructure, civil and building sector, and also oil and gas and power. He has been called to distressed projects to provide strategic and governance advice and negotiate disputes on behalf of international clients. So Michael, as a first question, I would like you to initially provide an overview, more on a macroeconomic aspect of the Mozambican construction sector to the audience, please.
Thank you for the introduction, Paulo, and thank you for the question. Thank you. Thank you for just sharing those slides. Prior to just answering this question, I just want to give you a quick overview. We go to the second slide, just on HK. We just to give a bit of context, really, and as a business, what we are involved with, what countries we're involved with, and if those that can see that where it says fluent in 30+ languages, I'm afraid I'm not in Portuguese, sadly, but hopefully you won't hold that against me. HK's involvement in Africa, in our next slide, gives a bit of an overview of some of the projects that we've actually been involved with within Mozambique, within main Africa, and myself in renewables within Northern Africa, etc. as well. So as a business, we have a wealth of knowledge with about 1,000 people within our business that we can call on to assist in various projects. So jumping back to your question of macroeconomic within the Mozambique construction sector, I had a look at what inspired me a little bit was the approach and the initiative launched in 2018 about the energy for all. Energy is an area where I've done quite a bit of work on, and that program started in 2018 to ensure that part of that sustainable development goal within Mozambique was to have energy for all by 2030. That's coordinated by the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, with the implementation and financial support of the World Bank and other independent power projects. Now, one means of achieving this Energy for All initiative is focus on renewables, which I think we all agree aligns with the global initiative to reduce climate change, etc. And indeed, I believe last month there was an investment forum within Mozambique on renewables. And this renewable sector has highlighted from the Mozambique Renewables Energy Atlas that the total renewable potential is circa 7,500 megawatts of priority projects, including solar power, about 600 megawatts, 5,600 megawatts of hydropower, and just over 1,000 megawatts of wind power in the first instance. So we've got a combination here of hydro, mini hydro, solar, mini solar grids, and hopefully by the 2030, the goal is to get in the region of about 600 megawatts from the renewable sector. I think that's quite an impressive startup, and there's not to say that this cannot extend even further in terms of output. The capacity of on-grid renewables currently was about 41 megawatts of solar, sorry, increasing over the next 10 years to about 306 megawatts for both solar and wind energy. Now, it's interesting to note that actually independent power projects make up and represent 17% of that installed capacity, 35% of production. And their contribution is expected to continue to increase. So there's quite a sizable investment opportunity there for businesses. And at the end of 2020, we had grid connection electrification rate was circa 34%. And this Energy for All programme will enable the government to ensure that by 2024, more than 10 million Mozambicans will have access to that electricity for the first time. And that's a significant challenge, and it will require additional effort, which will also include contribution of off-grid systems. On top of this, there is obviously, as we've discussed, the major projects, the electrical generation projects for business and large consumers, such as the LNG project, which come into play here. HKA has been LNG projects worldwide, and indeed has had discussions with one of the players within Mozambique. But that in itself will give the opportunity to supply gas-fired power stations. I believe there's one in Balloon Industrial Park to be built there, 2,000 megawatts. And obviously the associated businesses that will consume as development ensues power. And also within the sector, there is the ability that the power generation is for export as well, not necessarily in country usage, as I'm aware that Sasol development of the LNG pipeline from northern Mozambique to South Africa to assist with easing the pressure on Eskom's needs for the pressure there. So there's quite a sizable investment opportunity within this sector, within this economy. I'll hand back to you on that one, Paolo. Does that answer your question?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Michael. As another question, so two questions actually, I will combine them for you.
Okay.
So in light of all this potential that Mozambique has in the energy sector that you presented, so firstly, what are the real opportunities for numerous companies in the subsectors that could be enjoyed for business opportunities? And also, despite the opportunities themselves, what would you highlight as well, in the other hand, as the risks and challenges for all the companies looking for projects and investments in Mozambique?
Okay, thank you for that. I think what spawns from this, and I think there's a common theme from the discussions earlier with the other panel members as well, is this for investment. I mean, it could be by country. US is investing somewhere in the region of $4 billion. We've got UK, Italy, South Africa, Japan as country investors, but also companies investing within Mozambique, Total, Mitsui, PTT, Thailand, major companies that also sit below these companies, which can bring in and will bring in expat workers, combining with local entities and initiatives to upscale local resources and transfer those skill sets required within the country, which forms back to what Nono Martins was saying at the outset of trying to develop that skill set within the country. And I think from that, I think that gives us an ability there to see where the investment is coming in, but also tipping into where problems, risks start to materialize also, whether that's from the different cultural aspects of different organizations and different practices from different organizations to come in. Both my colleagues Sakai and Gideon mentioned the crux thing. I put on a couple of slides earlier to share with you on that, to give you an insight where, when we have done this research program within our business, we have looked at circa 1,200 projects with a capex of in excess of 1.8 billion. And within there, we've identified changes. Some of those changes, as Sakai highlighted earlier, whether it be behavioural, scope definition, poor management, etc. And that in itself, from foreign entities coming in with foreign investment, provides challenges for some of these entities and some of these companies, and highlight some of the risks that require to be ironed out. I think I'll probably come in leading into the next part of the question, and the aspect where both Sakai and Gustavo mentioned, which is the dispute avoidance element within there as well. Does that give you enough follow on that?
Sure, absolutely. So just as a last remark, Michael, so what would you summarize as key takeaways? So what would you recommend to companies in order to enjoy or to benefit from all these potential opportunities, but at the same time, avoiding as much as possible any risks and disputes?
I think it comes back to, I think, because Alan mentioned it as well, is seeking the right resource, whether that be a legal resource, whether that be a consultant, to provide that knowledge and understanding of those sectors. As I said, we hold a database of Crux which not only looks at countries and continents, but looks at specific types of sectors, whether it's renewable, mining, etc., infrastructure. And there is actually significant traits within those specific industries that that are highlighted. And if and with this knowledge, organizations can have a better understanding of what those are, then the structures that they can put in place prior to the project commencing will get a good head start in avoiding that level of dispute that may occur.
Perfect, Michael. Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments, and we may come back to you in a Q&A section. So having thanks Michael for his contribution, I will now direct my questions to George Solomo. He will be focused more on the legal framework of the infrastructure sector in Mozambique. So as a brief introduction, George is a lawyer based in Mozambique, in Maputo. He graduated at the Higher Institute of Science and Technologies of Mozambique, AfCFTA. He is also an assistant professor since 2008 of Obligations Law at AfCFTA. He coordinates the litigation practice area of FLA law firm, practicing with contracts and litigation. So George, as a first question for you, I would like you to please describe the legal framework of Mozambique infrastructure sector. So what are the main set of laws involved for civil construction, heavy construction, private heavy construction, public? So please provide an overview to the audience, please.
Hi. Hello, Paulo, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, George. Please go ahead. All
right, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm going to speak in Portuguese because my English is not so good to explain everything which is important. That's why I would like to. I'm sorry if you can. I'm sorry to speak in Portuguese, but I think it's a Lusophone country. That's why I know there are international people in other countries, but I feel well if I can speak in Portuguese. If you don't mind, may I? All right, thank you. Bem, Paulo, é assim, a legislação em Moçambique na área de construção é diversa, portanto está de forma dispersa. Nós encontramos esta matéria em várias áreas de construção civil. Por exemplo, nós temos na área de obras públicas, nós encontramos várias legislação, como é o caso, por exemplo, do decreto número 5/2016. Este é um decreto que regula o regulamento, portanto, de contratação de empreitadas de obras públicas. Nós temos também um decreto número 94/90 de 2013, que regula, por exemplo, a matéria de licenciamento de empreiteiros e de consultores na área de construção civil. Nós temos também, por exemplo, nesta área de construção, de empreitadas de obras públicas, por exemplo, os vários diplomas ministeriais que são criados pelo Ministério de Obras Públicas, de Habitação e Recursos Hídricos. É o caso, por exemplo, do decreto que cria a Comissão de Licenciamento de Empreiteiros e de Consultores na área de construção civil. É esta comissão que tem a competência de licenciar os empreiteiros, é esta comissão que tem a competência de licenciar os consultores na área de construção civil. Existe um diploma ministerial que cria o seu funcionamento. Na área, por exemplo, na área de obras particulares, existe um regime muito especial, de licenciamento de obras particulares. Este regime é aprovado, portanto, pelo decreto número 2/2004, portanto. Nós temos também, na área, por exemplo, a matéria de construção, entra em contato também com outras áreas, nomeadamente com a área de terras, por exemplo. Aí temos a legislação de terras, a lei de terras, que é a lei número 19/97, de 1 de outubro. Temos, porque a matéria da construção também envolve outras áreas, como a matéria, como do ambiente, por exemplo. Nós temos a legislação ambiental, que, nos termos do artigo 15 da Lei do Ambiente, a licença ambiental precede quaisquer outras licenças, e por isso mesmo a necessidade de se obter primeiro a licença ambiental em função da categoria ou das classes, das categorias e classes que se pretende desenvolver a atividade. Portanto, havendo necessidade de se fazer uma avaliação de impacto ambiental, ou um estudo de impacto ambiental, seja ele estudo de impacto ambiental certificado, ou se inclusive há isenções. Portanto, existem regulamentos de avaliação de impacto ambiental que tratam esta matéria. Na área específica, por exemplo, matérias de petróleos, existe também um regulamento específico de avaliação de impacto ambiental para a matéria de petróleos, existe um regulamento de avaliação de impacto ambiental para a matéria de minas, e existe um regulamento de avaliação de impacto ambiental nos termos gerais. Portanto, temos também um regulamento que regula, portanto, passo aqui a repetição, a matéria de licenciamento, como é que a comissão que vai licenciar as construções, por exemplo, aos empreiteiros, como é que deve funcionar, quais são os requisitos que são necessários para o licenciamento dessa atividade. Entre outras disposições. Podemos falar também das competências e atribuições do Ministério de Obras Públicas, Habitação e Recursos Hídricos. Este é o Ministério que tem a competência e atribuições sobre matérias ligadas à construção, quer grande construção ou até de dimensão mais baixa. Sem prejuízo, obviamente, das competências que são atribuídas às autarquias locais, aos municípios, aos governos distritais.
Okay, George, thank you. So just making a wrap up here in English for the audience. So as you mentioned, the Mozambique legislation is sparse. So there are several diplomas that will eventually regulate the construction. So for each particular project, we'll have to take a look not only for the construction itself, depending on the client, but also to other aspects as environmental and etc., as you mentioned. Great. So as a second question, George, we'll do it in English and Portuguese here for you. As you finished discussing about the Ministry of Public Works, so provide a little bit of the regulatory framework for companies that want to be licensed for construction in Mozambique. So what are the main requirements for this licensing within the country?
Bem, Paulo, nós aqui em Moçambique, nós temos um regulamento, portanto, para empreitadas, obras públicas, os requisitos para o seu licenciamento. Por exemplo, para o licenciamento de empreiteiros e consultores de construção civil, o Decreto 94/2013, de 31 de dezembro, vem-nos estabelecer os requisitos. Essencialmente, há necessidade que as instituições, seja, por exemplo, a empresa em nome individual ou sociedades comerciais, sejam elas nacionais ou estrangeiras, todas elas devem ter requisitos de elegibilidade. Portanto, esses requisitos de elegibilidade constam da própria lei, do próprio decreto. O que é necessário, por exemplo, que o interessado apresente ao ministro, portanto, um requerimento dirigido ao Ministério das Obras Públicas e Habitação. Primeiro, deve demonstrar a sua existência legal, a sua nacionalidade, deve apresentar, portanto, o seu contrato de sociedade, deve apresentar a sua certidão de registro comercial, deve apresentar o certificado definitivo, deve apresentar a declaração de património, no caso, sendo uma empresa individual, em nome individual, apresentar a declaração do próprio património e comprovativos do respectivo valor, deve apresentar a lista dos titulares, dos administradores, quem são os administradores, quem são os gestores, quem são os gerentes, com os respectivos documentos de identificação, deve demonstrar quem são, qual é o quadro permanente, incluindo os respectivos documentos, deve demonstrar a capacidade técnica, deve provar os certificados de habilitação, deve provar que tem competência, competência técnica, digo, e também equipamento mínimo, a necessidade de demonstrar em função das classes ou categorias que o empreiteiro ou a empresa pretende desenvolver essa atividade ou pretende ser licenciada ou autorizada a desenvolver a atividade, deve apresentar um equipamento mínimo, portanto, à entidade competente. É importante referir que o alvará ou o exercício da atividade só pode ser, neste caso, será concedido mediante uma visita prévia, portanto, às instalações da entidade que pretende ser licenciada. Portanto, é preciso demonstrar que é idônea, que tem essas capacidades aqui que me referi. Paulo.
Great. Thank you, George. I will now combine questions 3 and 4. So first, what are the contractual framework for the construction projects in Mozambique? So what are the types of contracts, applicable laws that are commonly used? And also the dispute resolution mechanism in such contracts. So what have you been seeing through your experience with all the construction projects in Mozambique?
Bem, bom, começando, normalmente aqui em Moçambique tem sido prática que a resolução de conflitos seja por via dos tribunais comuns, neste caso, dos tribunais judiciais. Mas a legislação moçambicana permite, incluindo, por exemplo, o decreto número 5/2016, que regula a matéria de empreitadas de obras públicas, permite que a entidade contratante e a contratada, neste caso, o empreiteiro, possam optar, por exemplo, ou recorrer em caso de disputa, de litígios, possam recorrer à arbitragem. E isso tem sido prática em Moçambique, por via, por exemplo, do Centro de Arbitragem, Conciliação e Mediação em Moçambique, tem recebido vários casos e tem gerido vários casos de natureza da matéria de construção, portanto, a matéria de empreitadas de obras públicas em especial, mas também de outra índole, mas sempre ligado à construção. Normalmente, a discussão tem mesmo que ver com empreitadas de obras públicas. Muitas vezes a discussão gira à volta de empreitadas de obras públicas. Paulo?
Okay, perfect, George. So thank you very much. Thank you for the explanation about the legal aspects of the construction projects in Mozambique. So not only the legal framework as a whole, but also for the regulatory side and also the contractual framework. That's very clear. I will now to discuss more of the in practice shift and invite here for the panel Hugo Gaspar. And as a brief introduction, Hugo will be focusing his contributions on the infrastructure sector market and practice in Mozambique. And introducing Hugo, Hugo is a Mozambican civil engineer who spent several years abroad in Malaysia and Portugal before returning to Mozambique. Currently, he's a project controls manager in the operations field of the multinational construction company Zagop from Andrade Gutierrez Group. He quickly developed an appreciation and became well-versed in the arts of cost control and planning, as well as various market dynamics. His focus in the company has been in the oil and gas field, and he dedicated to early works and SMP projects. So Hugo, welcome to the panel. And to start your contribution, I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit about the operations of Zagop AG in Mozambique in the infrastructure sector, please.
Good afternoon, Paulo. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about the company and what we are facing in the country, in Mozambique right now. So if you move to the next slide, please. So if you look at Zagope, we belong to the AG group, as we can see, as a holding, and this holding is divided into two sections. One is the engineering side, and the second one is in the investment. And please, if you continue. And this engineering section is further divided into two branches. One which takes care of the Brazilian and Latin America construction sector, which is led by the AG group in Brazil. And then the second one is led by Zagope in Portugal, that leads the Europe, Africa, and Asia sector. As the market is growing, we have also INZAG, which is involved in the process, and it's helping us in some of the countries that we have in Mozambique, in Africa for some of the projects. And moving also to the investment side, so this one is more focused in the investment sector in the Latin Americas. As a group, we're one of the largest companies in the Latin American sector with a gross revenue of $1 billion annually. Moving forward, please. So basically looking at the overall timeline of Zagope, so Zagope was founded in '67 and has and started construction in 69 with the first project awarded in Portugal. And later on in 88, the Portuguese group was acquired by the Brazilian branch, a Brazilian company, multinational, Andrade Gutierrez. And with Andrade Gutierrez, Zagope also started going into the African markets. Later in early 20s, this is when this is when Zagope became and started going even deeper into the African markets. That's when it became down to Mozambique, and we became having projects here in Mozambique. The first one that we acquired was one road construction, and then we moved for dam construction later in 1913, 14, and then later in 2020, this is when we became and we focus in the operation field of the LNG sector in Mozambique. Currently, we have two contracts in the LNG sector for Area 1. So the first one is the batch plant and aggregate supply, which one does focus mainly, if you go ahead, please. If this one focus mainly in the supply of concrete to every single subcontractor that CCS-JV and Total have on site for the construction of the natural gas. Apart from the concrete, we'll also supply aggregates for every subcontractor on the LNG side for Area 1. And the second contract that we have is temporary utilities contract, and this one is more focused in the construction of networks. We're talking about water, treated water, desalinated water, telecommunication, and also supply of and construction of fuel systems that will allow the temporary facilities to run. Being on the field and being in the north of Mozambique, of course, there's a lot of challenges, not just related to the project, but also related to logistics. And the main one that we face is a logistics constraint due to several reasons. Some of them broken bridges connecting parts of the country to the project site. We also had a couple of security incidents in the region surrounding the project. And also we have a lot of vessel and port constraints. And because of all of that, so Zagope decided to operate one vessel that would allow us to run the project, to supply cement and transport equipment and other materials to site. So with that, we obtained the cabotage license to the local government and authorities and allow us to transport this and work along the coast of Mozambique. So briefly, that's what Zagope AG Group has been in the market and running in Mozambique.
Thank you, Hugo. My second question, I would like to ask you about the types of construction projects, especially on their financing basis in Mozambique. What we have been seeing through the last years has been a trend in Mozambique and also in several other countries due to all the macroeconomic aspects and increase of governmental debts. It was a trend of moving away from the traditional EPC model, where the government pays for the construction, normally financed by debt, normally provided by major DFIs, ECAs, especially from European countries, China, Brazil, and etc. And normally they used to be secured by sovereign guarantee. And now a new trend of going to the direction of a concession PPP model with more complexity in terms of the financing structure. So project finance structure, asset finance structure, potentially as reserve-based lending among many other financing alternatives. So what would you comment on that? What have you been seeing practice in relation to this financing of construction projects?
So I believe it was Miguel Alves that he said, he commented in Angola. So this is a work in progress. So the same applies to Mozambique. So we are shifting for a method of financing projects in the country that whereby the government was running everything. They were running that in order to sustain these projects. And with this shift, that not only Mozambique is following, but the rest of the world is also following, would allow a more secure finance approach. And not just that, so we would have a better risk assessment around the overall project. And the resources will be allocated accordingly, and that there won't be continuous use the same resources. So bottom line, this new approach of PPE models and concessions allows not just the construction firms to have a better secure financial structure, but also for investors to also be more confident in approaching the different sectors in the country.
Okay, Hugo, and in relation to the market itself and the opportunities, what would you highlight as the major both opportunities and challenges in the infrastructure sector in Mozambique? So in relation to the opportunities, what do you see as potential projects? You see more this new type of PPPs, concessions. Do you see also a bigger role for civil construction and housing? So what are your thoughts about that?
So when it comes down to construction opportunities and challenges, one that mainly big construction firms face when they move to a new country or to move to a new continent in this case, right? So it would be the local manpower. But I don't see that only as a challenge, right? But I'll see that as an opportunity, because that's the way that companies, when they approach a new project, a new country, they leave a legacy behind, and they teach and they develop the local manpower. So this is one thing that we saw when the big mining companies got into the country. So they face the same problem with unskilled people, unskilled manpower, and they were able to develop this manpower because everyone is willing to learn here in Mozambique and to further develop their skills as well. So with this massive LNG projects that we are having right now in Mozambique, also thermoelectrical projects that we have in Mozambique, this allows companies not only to develop local manpower, but also to leave a legacy behind. Apart from that, one other challenge that we face here in Mozambique in the construction sector is that Mozambique is mainly a country that imports goods. So most of the goods that we need, goods, materials, and equipment that we need to have in the construction sector, they need to be imported. And we face a lot of challenges in the importation process, right? So that would be the second biggest challenge that we have right now. And in terms of opportunity, of course, so Mozambique is a growing economy right now. So there are a lot of new projects. There's a booming projects in the country. And answering the last bit of your question, right? So we have at the moment LNG for Area 1, which is ongoing. We have a lot of projects and not just involved to that, but also to support the LNG Area 1. We also have Area 4 that is coming up soon. We're just planning the FID. And apart from that, from the LNG, so we have also the thermoelectrical projects that we are having in Mozambique. So we have, for example, one in Vilanculos, which is about 800 kilometers from Maputo. This one is for thermoelectrical with 420 megawatts. We have others in Matola, for example, which is here in Maputo with 100 megawatts. And we have another thermoelectric in Nacala up north with 250 megawatts. So there are new projects that are arising in the country with different skills moving towards the energy sector that allow Mozambique to develop and become more versatile. And not just that, as Mozambique is also moving towards the cabotage, is improving the cabotage system, and that allows everyone to move goods from port to port. And there are several projects that are coming up that would allow to have better ports or port improvement projects as well.
Okay, Hugo, thank you very much. That was a good overview of all the potential opportunities and also the challenges in Mozambique. So I would like to thank you very much for your intervention in order to finish here right on time our panel. So we are very precisely on the schedule. I will now finish the Mozambique panel and we'll shift to Itueva Nogueira, so she can provide us her final remarks of the event itself with key highlights of all the panels that we had during this afternoon and morning here. So Itueva, I'll shift it up to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paulo. Thank you to all participants. So we came now to the time to finish this event. It has been a fantastic time where a group of great professionals and multidisciplinary has been here talking to you and sharing their experiences in Angola and Mozambique. So I would like to thank, of course, I already thanked all participants, but just to highlight a little bit of what, if not all, but the majority of speakers, Mr. Shinjamba shared about the procedures at IPEX, the investment agency for the promotion of imports and exports. One of the main features is the time that the investment project is approved now, which also includes the setup of the new company if the foreign investor intends to set up a company after the approval of his investment project. So another main feature is that our Angolan investment law doesn't have limits, not minimum or maximum limits for the investment, which is very good and is supposed to attract more and more investors. Gideon gave us a great history class about infrastructure projects in Africa, how the Western countries boost their economies through the construction projects, how they are important to provide more and to increase employment at the end of the day. And also shared a number of challenges that African countries face in terms of infrastructure projects. Then we went to Miguel, and for me, one of the main, Miguel was, one of the main sets of Miguel's intervention was that actually in Angola, we still have, we are in the middle of the way, as we have a part of the public sector who is very open-minded to these PPPs, but another group is still very conservative, but things are happening and we will get there. Also, Tiago talked about the presence of IFC in Angola, which is very important, because until now we only had the backup of investment banks and development banks for the governments, but now with the IFC in Angola, they were already in Mozambique, but now in Angola, to liaise with private sector, there is a new outcome to promote investment. Mozambique, actually when we listened to Sekai, there was a lot of things that were very interesting. One of them was the issues around dispute resolution, how the dispute resolution, what are the choices for dispute resolution, and one of the things that she stressed was exactly the main causes of poor contract management. So what are the situations around the performance of the contract that at the end of the day creates some friction between the parties. Thank you, George, for your intervention. Also talking about the regulations in Mozambique, the licensing of the activities around these projects, and finally, I think was Hugo talking about the financing of construction projects. Of course, we have been here for, well, more than 2 hours, which has been very interesting. This webinar has been recorded to all that wants to listen and eventually try to remember our names to contact further. If you have any query, please contact the Africa Construction Law. You have their contacts on LinkedIn, where you saw a great promotion of this event, and also on the website you have access to the email. In the name of the Africa Construction Law, thank you very much for attending this. Please stay connected. Please subscribe the newsletter or the email to receive further news about the initiative, because there are a lot of good things happening. The publication of the construction law system for each of the countries of the initiative. So it's not just today was the final day for the Lusophone Africa, Angola and Mozambique. Unfortunately, we couldn't have Cape Verde involved, but we will have later. So please stay connected, because more things are here on our way. So thank you all attendees. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you very much to all the organizers, Mayor Brown, who was fantastic in supporting the Africa Construction Law in the organization of these events, especially this one, the Lusophone one, HKA as well. Thank you to Denton's Lead, my law firm also, that was very supportive of this event and created all the conditions for us here. Please continue to keep in touch with us, get in touch with Ngo Martins. With me on behalf of the Lusophone subcommittee, and thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thank you all, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.